Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating conversation about animal behavior and honestly, what it ultimately teaches us about ourselves. Sometimes the absolute best insights don't come from some dense, boring academic journal. They come from everyday observations. Our focus today revolves around a really thought-provoking chat between a super observant 12-year-old boy named Aryan and his mom. They touch on this concept that completely forces us to question the environments we build for ourselves and how those spaces literally shape who we are at our core. So, get ready, because we're exploring that crazy boundary between primal instinct and captivity.
We're going to start right off the bat with a shocking real-world incident that Aryan brought up. He talks about reading an article regarding a pretty terrifying scenario. A young kid leans way too far over a railing and actually falls right into a tiger enclosure at a local zoo. Now, just pause for a second and picture that scene in your head. You've got an apex predator, a massive creature literally engineered by nature to rule the food chain, and suddenly there's this incredibly vulnerable intruder right in its territory. You'd expect total chaos, right? You'd expect a total tragedy. But as Aryan noted, the tiger came, saw, and did absolutely nothing. It's wild. This perfectly sets up our core puzzle for today, because that outcome completely defies every single expectation we have about wild animals.
And that leads us to a really crucial question, one that makes us rethink everything we assume about predators living in captivity. Why on earth did the tiger do absolutely nothing? Aryan's mom points out that, yeah, obviously it's a terrifying situation and you really have to question what that kid was doing. But the real mystery here, it's the tiger's inaction. Why did this magnificent lethal beast just sort of stand down? It's a question that demands an answer, because it feels so entirely contrary to the laws of nature.
Well, to solve this mystery, we have to wrap our heads around a profound distinction that Aryan's mom points out. She explains that a tiger in a zoo and a tiger in the wild are exactly the same on a biological level. They've got the exact same muscle structure, the same razor-sharp claws, the same teeth, the identical genetic code, but the environment? The environment has fundamentally rewritten their behavior. A great way to think about it is like having the exact same biological hardware, but entirely different behavioral software installed.
To really hammer this difference home, Aryan contrasts that crazy zoo incident with a personal memory. He brings up a family trip they took to the Pench Jungle Safari. And in that environment, let me tell you, the rules were absolute. They were strictly forbidden from stepping out of their safari vehicle at any point. Why? Because the tigers out in Pench are definitely not zoo animals. As Aryan rightfully points out, those tigers in the jungle safari would absolutely not have reacted with that same passive indifference to a human just dropping into their space.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is looking at the stark contrast in the environments that are shaping these genetically identical animals. On one hand, you have the Pench Safari. It's this unpredictable, fiercely competitive wilderness where mere survival is a daily, grueling battle. And on the other hand, you have the zoo. It's a highly controlled, enclosed space. Meals are literally scheduled and hand-delivered, threats are completely eliminated, and every single day is entirely predictable. The environment acts as this invisible hand, completely molding the psychology of the animal.
When you put their behavioral traits side by side, that psychological divide becomes incredibly obvious. A wild tiger is heavily driven by its natural instincts. Because it lives in the unforgiving wild, if it feels threatened, its immediate hardwired response is to attack, period. Conversely, you have a zoo tiger that was born and raised entirely in captivity. It's never actually learned how to hunt. So when faced with an unexpected stimulus, like a boy suddenly falling into its enclosure, what does it do? Well, just like the mom notes, it'll perhaps just sit there and literally not know what to do. The captive tiger simply lacks those learned survival instincts of its wild counterpart. The instinct is completely dormant. It's unexercised, and frankly, it's just unnecessary for surviving day-to-day in a cage.
So Aryan, being incredibly curious kid he is, asks the next logical question. He wonders, okay, if this internal psychological difference is really that massive, does it leave a physical mark on the animal? Like, can you just look at a tiger and immediately know if it belongs roaming the wild or if it was bred in a zoo? It's a brilliant question, really. It asks whether our internal conditioning is actually visible to the outside world.
And according to Aryan's mom, the answer is a resounding yes. The environment absolutely changes the physical expression of the tiger, and specifically, you can see it right in their gaze. She explains that the visual tell is entirely in the eyes. It all comes down to the super clear contrast between having fire in the eyes versus having docile eyes. It's pretty striking when you think about it, how the total lack of environmental challenge physically alters the presence and the whole aura of the animal.
Let's break down exactly what that wild gaze really looks like. The intense, untamed qualities that define a wild tiger are just undeniable. The mom describes the wild tiger as being independent, it's fierce, it's unforgiving.
And above all else, it literally has that fire in its eyes. And these aren't just pretty, poetic words, you know? They're the actual visual manifestation of an animal that has to rely entirely on itself to survive, hunt, and dominate its territory every single day of its life.
But on the flip side, the zoo-bred tiger is described as having docile eyes. Why is that? Because a life of absolute safety, guaranteed daily meals, and zero real threats completely extinguishes, or I guess more accurately, prevents the ignition of that natural spark. The mom explicitly states that the fire of the wild simply never developed in it. And this is the massive takeaway here. When an environment demands absolutely nothing of you, the fiercest parts of your nature just go to sleep. The hardware is there, sure, but the fire is completely unlit.
Now here is where this explainer takes a much deeper turn. Arian, soaking up all this information about biology, environment, and instinct, suddenly turns all this behavioral science inward. He says, "I will study this, Mama. I am fascinated." And then he drops this heavy question. Am I like the wild one or the zoo-bred one? Boom! He brings us right to the metaphorical lesson of this entire exploration. He recognizes that we humans are also profoundly shaped by our environments. Are we living in a way that cultivates our inner fire, or are we just chilling in a comfortable little enclosure that's making us docile? This matters so much because it's fundamentally about how we choose to live our lives. His mom gives him a piece of advice in response that just beautifully synthesizes everything they've been talking about. She tells him, "You need to figure that out, but light the fire in you like the wild, but learn to do the right thing at the right place like the zoo one." That is some incredibly practical wisdom right there. She isn't telling him to go act like some feral animal, but she's also not saying to be a passive captive. She's advocating for balance. We absolutely need that fierce independence, that relentless drive, and the fire of the wild to achieve our goals and smash through challenges. But we also need the discipline, the structure, and the societal awareness of the zoo environment to channel that fire appropriately, to do the right thing at the right place.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocation, drawn straight from Arian's realization. Are you driven by the wild, or are you bred by the zoo? Take a hard look at your own routines, your own comforts, and the challenges you face. Are you allowing a life of extreme comfort to quietly extinguish your natural drive? Or are you actively keeping that fire lit while still maintaining the discipline to use it wisely? Honestly, it's a question worth asking yourself every single day. Keep that fire alive and keep learning. Catch you next time.